So the idea that we often automatically react to some emotional stimuli suggests that we have some fundamental innate emotions. The theory of basic emotions suggests that all cultures identify the same kind of basic emotions: anger, disgust, fear, sadness, joy, and surprise. So in various cultures, we can find that people quite easily recognize these basic facial expressions. And this theory suggests that across different cultures, we can find the same basic emotional reactions and also basic emotions. So this our ability to detect emotional stimuli and react to emotional stimuli automatically perhaps assumes that we have innate emotions. So the theory of basic emotions suggests that across different cultures, people identify the same kind of emotions, at least anger, disgust, fear, sadness, joy, and surprise. So we are able to recognize faces, facial expressions across different cultures. And we can also recognize expressions produced by the members of other cultures. So here you see the happy, disgusted, angry face of a person from Papua New Guinea. And actually American students made between 46 and 73% correct judgments for happy, angry, sad, and disgust expressions. Students were not so good in the correct judgments of fear or surprise, but overall we show quite dramatic ability to recognize emotional expressions correctly across different cultures. So this effect can be illustrated by emotional expressions produced by blind and deaf children from birth. These children never saw any emotional expressions, but as you see here on these examples, they're emotionally expressive. You see clear happy faces, you see smiles, sadness, you see angry expressions on faces of children who never saw any expressions in their life because they are blind from birth. So it looks like we have an innate ability to produce emotional expressions, we have an innate ability to recognize emotional expressions, and it looks like we have an innate set of emotions. At least some basic emotions are universal. So why do we need these emotions? Why do we need this complex system of basic emotions? Perhaps to select some actions based on specific emotions. The appraisal theory of emotions suggests that emotion consists of steps. So first, when we face an emotional fact, an emotional object, it triggers an appraisal of this event. So next, we evaluate the context of the emotional event, and this evaluation process changes our priorities for certain actions. It changes action readiness. So emotional evaluation would give a priority to certain decision, to certain action. And finally, based on this process, we release the action, or we start and make a choice, and also this choice, this decision, this behavior is accompanied by physiological changes, by emotional expressions, and so on. So here you see a process of emotions, and at the end of this process, we select certain action in response to the emotional stimulus. So we can illustrate this process using an example. For example, you are approached by a dangerous car, and what would you do? You first evaluate this event as relevant, as important for you. Next, emotions give a priority to one or two actions. For example, you will jump away from the street, and finally you will experience your emotions as a mental state accompanied by body changes, by expressions, by also actions. So within this process of emotions, you evaluate external objects and you select your action based on this evaluation process. So we can sum up this idea in this graph. So when we face an event, our brain system, our cognitive system, processes the stimulus, and we can select an action to react to this stimulus. We can imagine different mechanisms. We can select an action by chance, but this is not a very effective way to make decisions, to select actions. We can also use a rational search. It can be a very good solution, but quite often it takes a lot of time to make a rational search. Or we can simply use our emotions, our emotional reactions, our emotional evaluation of the stimulus. So emotions here are kind of heuristics. So we select actions, we select our choices based on emotions. Sometimes emotional stimuli automatically trigger emotions and trigger our actions. Sometimes we have to learn that certain objects have values. So it looks like in the brain we have two parallel processes. One, an automatic processing of innate emotional stimuli that have innate values, and additional system in the brain related to, first of all, to amygdala and also to orbitofrontal cortex, is involved into active learning of new values or into updating of values. So we will focus on the second system, and we will see today that learning of values, learning of emotional meanings of the stimuli can dramatically modulate our decisions and also our financial decisions. So let's try to understand some basic facts about the emotional affective mechanisms in our brain. So I have to mention the theory of limbic system. This is an old theory, and nowadays it's not very popular, so the strong version of this theory perhaps is wrong. But the weak version of this theory is still popular, perhaps because it captures very interesting aspects of our emotions. So Paul MacLean suggested that in our brain we can find three large portions. The evolutionary old portion belongs to our reptilian ancestors. So it is evolutionarily very old, and on top of this reptilian brain we got a new region, so-called limbic system, the system surrounding the reptilian brain, and this system is related to a dramatic revolution in the behavior of mammalians compared to the behavior of reptilians. So think for a moment, what would be the major difference between reptilian behavior and mammalian behavior? So what would be the most pronounced difference? So perhaps our emotional and our social life is much richer than emotional and social life of reptilians. Mammalians communicate much more often to each other. We also have a rich vocal communication system. We care about our offsprings much more. There is much closer relationship within the communities of mammalians than normally within the communities of reptilians. So we have a richer social and emotional life. And actually Paul MacLean suggested this dramatic change in our behavior was associated with the development of the limbic system. So this is a system in our brain that is linked to emotions, to our social life, to our care about our offsprings, to our vocal communication. So this region or limbic system is related to a dramatic revolution in social, emotional, parent behavior of mammalians in comparison with reptiles. So interestingly, the damage of these structures indeed lead to quite critical abnormalities in sexual, emotional, social behavior. So taking together, the theory of limbic system suggests that in our brain we can find an evolutionary new system that is connected to a dramatic revolution in our social, emotional, and parent behavior, and as compared to the behavior of reptiles. Interestingly, the damage of these structures indeed lead to very serious abnormalities in sexual, emotional, and feeding behavior. So traditionally, a limbic system includes cingulate cortex, amygdala, hypothalamus, orbitofrontal cortex, hippocampus. Sometimes orbitofrontal cortex is also included to the limbic system. But nowadays, the strong version of this theory, suggesting that there is a single emotional system in the brain, is not popular anymore. So I would present you an opinion of the leading neuroscientist, Joseph Ledoux, who is a leading researcher in the field of affective neuroscience, who suggests that the idea that there is a single emotional system in the brain is misleading. So it looks like we have different systems dedicated to different emotions, and each of these systems is involved into solving some problems related to our survival. So it looks like there is no single emotional system in the brain, but there are different systems involved in different emotional processes. So now it makes sense to give a definition of emotions. As Edmund Rawls suggested, emotions are states elicited by rewards and punishers, including the changes in reward and punishment. For the purpose of this course, I will use the shorter version of this definition. Emotions are states elicited by stimuli with non-zero utility. So basically, punishers and rewards, they have values. And for the purpose of this neuroeconomics course, I think we can use this short version of the definition. Of course, this is simplification of the story. I will try to explain you the related problems in the next slides. But this definition is quite effective. So Edmund Rawls fitted major emotions into the two-dimensional space related to the presentation of rewards, presentation of punishments, or to the emission of rewards and emission of punishments. So pleasure is experienced when we get some reward, and ecstasy is experienced when we get a lot of rewards. So fear is experienced when we are punished, and terror is experienced when we are punished a lot. So in the same way, we feel frustration if the reward is omitted, or we feel an anger if reward is omitted. Or we can feel a relief if the punishment is omitted. So indeed, within this definition of Edmund Rawls, we can fit the majority of emotions. Importantly, for our course, we use the shorter version of this definition. We suggest that emotions are equal to subjective values or to utilities. Of course, emotions are more complex phenomena than subjective values. I would illustrate it in the next slide. So when you feel an emotion, emotion is normally triggered by the stimulus, so emotional situation. Next, you interpret the situation. Next, you perhaps trigger a physiological reaction. Emotional expressions are produced. You have an emotional feeling, your mood changes, and all of these steps modulate other steps. So emotion normally is a very complex phenomena. It consists of various stages. We use a very simple definition for the purpose of this course. Emotions are equal to values. Of course, emotions also include mood changes, emotional expressions, physiological reactions, and so on. But for the purpose of our neuroeconomics course, I think it is important to understand that values are parts of the emotions. So emotions perhaps are more complex phenomena than values. But surprisingly, emotional brain regions also encode values, as we will see throughout the course. So during the course, we will use the simplest version of the definition of emotions, so that emotions are produced by stimuli with non-zero utility. Of course, emotions are more complex phenomena than utility. Utility is a component of emotions. But utility is coded by emotional neuronal networks. And we will see during the course that emotional brain regions are involved into the valuation stage of the decision-making process. So now let's try to understand how the innate aspects of emotions are decoded by the brain, and how do we learn emotional meanings of some emotional stimuli, and how does it affect our decisions.